Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Digital to Dice podcast. I am Dave.
I'm Ron.
And Ron, we got episode 107 today.
107 QFM.
I know everyone's got a 107 too.
We're not done with the FMs after this, by the way.
Yeah, we're gonna be. Is it like that's it, right? 107.9 is at the end of it.
107.9. That's the end of the FM.
So we'll have to figure out what else we'll do after that. Hey, in episode 107, we got a terrific interview. We're going to talk to Clay Dreslough. If you've heard of Baseball Mogul and Football Mogul, he is the guy, the owner, designer, programmer for all of those games there. So we got a great interview with him. First off, ways to get a hold of us. Digitaltodice.com is our website. 978-751-DICE is the dice line. Digitaltodice@yahoo.com is our email. And over on Facebook, facebook.com/groups/digitaltodice. So without further ado,
let's do it.
Here we go. Clay Dreslough from Sports Mogul. Joining us on the dice line, we have Clay Dreslough. He is the owner of Sports Mogul, Inc., and the designer and the programmer for Baseball Mogul and Football Mogul. Welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi, Dave and Ron.
Hi.
So tell us, Clay Dreslough, how did you get that pronunciation out of your name?
Well, 35 years ago, my name was Clay Dresser because that's my dad's name.
Okay.
And I met this lovely woman at Wellesley High in Massachusetts named Deirdre McLaughlin. And when we got married, we decided instead of hyphenating our name or something like that, because it would have been a real mess, it would have been about 22 letters, that we would combine our names. So we took the lock from McLaughlin, because that means lake. The Mc part just sort of means son of. There's not really anything there that you need to keep. And then took the dress part from dresser and made the name Dreslough. So it's lock. It's a hard K at the end because it comes from the Irish name McLaughlin.
Congratulations. I would never have gotten that.
No. And it's one cool thing about that is, so it's spelled Dreslough. We're my wife and I and our daughter are basically the only Dresloughs on the planet. So you can Google us. We have Dreslough.com as our website. So it's sort of nice to, you go on Google and get an email address and you're like, oh, my name isn't taken because nobody has my name. So it's nice.
Yeah, I have a pretty rare last name. I think my wife and I are the only two with my last name in Vermont.
Yeah, that's cool.
So I hear you on that, but you don't usually hear people creating a last name without a hyphen. So
yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Must make it tough at the souvenir shops. Remember as your kid is a souvenir shop, you're looking at all the little license plates. And Joe and Jim, and you're looking for your name in there. And sometimes you have a strange name. You're like, well, mine's not in there.
Mine was never in there as a kid, and that was Ron. There was no Rons.
That's funny. Ron was president when you were a kid, right?
When I was a teenager, and then that stuff started to appear a lot. But before the age of Reagan, there wasn't a lot of Rons or Ronnies in those. Dave is just bringing it right to me today.
Oh, poor Ron. Poor Ron's having a tough day. Anyway, so Clay, before we get going here, we do ask one question to all of our guests, and that question is, what sporting event would you attend if you could go back in time and attend any sporting event that ever happened?
I think the one that's most meaningful to me is Game 4 of the 2004 ALCS. I grew up in Boston as a Red Sox fan, and that was, we were up against the wall. Yankees were up 3-0. We were down a run in the bottom of the ninth. What was it? Millar got on base, maybe. Anyway, Dave Roberts pinch ran for him. And the play that sort of I just perennially call the steal, because everyone knew he was going to steal, everyone in the building. Obviously tied it up, and then Ortiz went ahead in the extra innings. And that's a game I didn't get to see on TV. I was in the middle of moving from Chicago back to Boston, and I was staying at my brother-in-law's house, and I was like half asleep from moving all day, and I had the clock radio on, and I was just listening to it, and I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe what just happened. But of course, it'd be cool to see it.
Yeah, I still love watching him slide home and then jump up and slap himself in the hand and then go to the bench. That was still a cool moment.
Yeah.
And
I turned that off in the top of the ninth.
Oh wow!
when Clark hit the ground rule double, I think it made it 3-1 or whatever it was. They scored, and after the way that they were embarrassed in Game 3, 19-8, I said I'm not ending my week with watching them celebrate on my field.
Oh, that's funny.
And I didn't know until I got the paper handed to me the next morning at 6:45.
Wow.
What had happened?
Wow. I'm not even a baseball guy, as you know. And I remember watching that, and I remember sitting there in that game, and they were down 3-0, and they were losing, like you're saying. And I'm sitting on the couch by myself at, midnight or whatever it was, because it was late. And I said, this cannot end like this. And that just came into my head. It said, this cannot end like this. and then they got the run, and they won the game. And then and I didn't think they'd come all the way back from 3 down, but when I was sitting there, when they lost 19-8 the night before, I remember watching that one, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, why am I watching this? I'm not even a baseball fan, but it says this can't end like this. It can't end with a sweep, and then the rest is history. But yeah, that would be a good one. Right? That's a good one.
2003 was such an incredible series.
Yes,
going to 7 games. Wakefield giving up the Aaron Boone homer. It wasn't fun if you're a Red Sox fan, but it was just an incredible series.
It was theater.
The idea that the next year was going to end in 4 games, it just didn't make sense. Yeah, so it had to at least fight it out, and then they kept going. It's sort of amazing. Game 5 is probably number 2 on my list because that was just as amazing a comeback. And then they had a little momentum, and Game 7 was I think it started with a grand slam. By Ellsbury in the first inning, and it was just like, oh wow, we might actually win this.
Was that the series that A-Rod hit the guy's glove and the ball flying out? Yeah, and then Bellhorn, who was 0 for 79 in the playoffs, hit a home run or something like that, and it hit the guy in the sweatshirt and bounced back. And at first, it wasn't a home run, and it's like everything just went the Red Sox way, and all the calls that they would never get. And they were all correct, by the way. They got all the calls correct, but those calls would never go the Red Sox way, and they finally did.
I was about to say, I knew that they were going to win that series when Bellhorn got credit for the home run.
Oh, that's awesome.
They got together and go, no.
Yeah, they didn't have the replay back then, I don't think, and that clearly was out, and they gathered around, they got it right. Good for them. But anyway, speaking of Boston, and I tell the story all the time, I went to a PAX East, which is a video game convention that's been held in Boston probably for 7 or 8 years now. And I was the video game guy at the time. I did the Game Hounds podcast for about 10 years, and we talked video games. And I strayed away from the video game section, and I went into a dark corner of the convention center. And there was these people playing this football game on the table with cards, and I stopped and I was like, what is this? And I'm like, well, who would do this? What is this football game here with cards? And I got talking to somebody at the table, and they're like, yeah, we're a company in Connecticut, and we're called Sports Mogul, and we have football and baseball, and if you go to our Facebook page this weekend, you can get a free copy of maybe it was last year's game. I don't know if it's the newer one or not. And I might even still have the little piece of paper you guys gave me with your Facebook page on it and the whole bit. And I come home and I downloaded Football Mogul, and I was like, I can play the 1976 New England Patriots. And I don't have any game in my video game catalog that I can do that with. But Football Mogul, I could. And I couldn't believe it. And the first thing I did is I traded Grogan and Stabler. And I wanted to see how it would work out if they played on different teams. And I'm like, I can play the 70s Patriots. I can trade players. What is this game? And that was my gateway game into sports sims, was Football Mogul, that I got at that PAX East show. And that was you guys, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That was me. I had a young guy named Connor working with me at the time. And actually our artist, woman named Angie, was there, I think, sort of helping keep the booth going, although she didn't know as much about the finer points of the game. But yeah, I don't know, that was just a blast. It was cool. A lot of people who'd been playing Football Mogul or Baseball Mogul came up and were amazed that, they could actually sort of talk to us in person and make suggestions. And we had the games running up on laptops. And then, of course, we were there mostly, we weren't, as you said, we weren't in the video game part of the building, gigantic, gigantic show that PAX East was, but we're off in a corner with the card and board games, and we were plugging. We were mostly selling decks and sort of boxed versions of a game called Masters of the Gridiron, which was a head-to-head football game that we made, and we had just launched it on Kickstarter, I think, successfully, and we mostly went to PAX to do things like sell all of the leftover decks that we had, and obviously like spread the word about any games that we made. But that was definitely a fun thing, and that's cool that you were there. I talked to people, and I don't remember your face, but definitely a lot of excited people, so that's cool. And we were giving away those cards that just had a link that said, hey, here's, I think it was the current version of the game. I mean, the secret of software is, last year's game or this year's game. You sort of want to give it away for free or a low cost if you can, and then hope that those fans will come back next year and the year after. Like, there's just so many people that haven't heard of Baseball Mogul or Football Mogul, or they played it 15 years ago and they don't know that, like, we now have the stats going back to 1950, or we now have some like play designer features and things that obviously the early game didn't have. So it's always good to just get people to try it, even if you don't get a lot of money originally from them.
Yeah, well, like I say, I found that game. I played the Baseball Mogul a little bit myself. We talk about it here on the show, and that worked. Whatever it was with that PAX show, that kind of worked with me. Let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about some of your first games that you actually played. What kind of get you into gaming? What's your gaming history?
In the late 70s, my next door neighbor had Catico All-Star Baseball with the spinners. Yep, which a lot of people have seen that game. Obviously, just had so many sort of realism problems in the sense that pitchers didn't matter, and there were some strategy things. Yeah. You had these weird cards that you would put in to bunt and so on. It would have like a C and a D result, and you did those things. So that was a game we played a lot. And then we were baseball card collectors, and so we sort of would make some games, make our own tables based on the stats on the baseball cards. I think there was a game called Long Ball, which came in a big box. It looked a lot like the Sports Illustrated, those big sort of 8x11 box, like those Avalon Hill style boxes. So there was a long ball game, which I think had 2 8-sided dice. It might have been sort of like a Status Pro clone, and I didn't really bump into Status Pro until later, but that was a game I think my dad bought and we played. And then we had Bowl Bound, and I had friends that had, there was a football game. I think it was Photo Electric Football. Does that ring a bell to you guys at all? So you take a play and you'd like stick it into a sleeve, I think, and there was a light underneath, and you'd have like an offense and defensive play overlap, and you'd like reveal the play.
Dave, I think that might be the NFL strategy, because that was something similar.
No, there was another game that you had the overlays that he's talking about. You put one down, then the other down, and then the light lit up and it showed you what happened on the play. Right. I've seen them on eBay. Every now and then a YouTube video will come up on those. I didn't have it as a kid, cool. But I'm aware of those. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that the realism was there, but boy, it was fun to watch. Watch your running back storm down the field and then try and figure out whether he was going to hit one of those defensive dots on the play the other guy had selected. And had enough. You had some different pegs you could set it up on, so there were some random variations. So you definitely had a lot of different results. And I thought it was really elegant. Actually, I love the way that, like, if there was a defender, so like the quarterback would sort of, the line would move out, and then there'd be like a dotted line to where he was throwing to. And so if there was a defender in the way of the dotted line, then it was incomplete. And if there was a defender like on the dot right where it was caught, then it would be an interception. And then sort of any other time it was just a tackle. So that was anyway, that was clever. I do remember the what was the game you just mentioned? NFL Strategy.
NFL Strategy was similar.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't own a lot of these games, but I remember going around to people's houses and playing them. That was one with a little bead and a spring, right? Something like that.
It was one that you overlaid the play on each other. Now I was very, very young when it was in the house, so I honestly don't remember if it was a dice thing or something like Photo Electric Football, but similar it was a 2-player game. Someone called it offense, some called it defense, and there was some sort of way to decide what happened on the play. But
yeah, and I was spending a lot of time at that age writing my own games, because I remember with like with Catico, we sort of had to figure out something with the pictures, and so we had like our own little dice thing on the side and the picture cards. And anyway, you'd spend more time working on the game than playing the game, because you'd play it and something wouldn't make sense, and then you say, oh, we got to tweak that. So that's, I don't know, I've always spent more time making games than playing them, because it's just an obsession. I can't, I'll be on the bus and just sort of thinking about, oh, I wonder if I do that with my game. So that's mostly my history. And then the same guys that I was playing sports games with, we were playing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. Was doing that a lot in high school. And my best friend and I in high school actually sort of got together and printed out a game at my dad's office in 1989. A game called One Step Beyond, a fantasy role-playing game. My wife did all the art for it, and we laid it out in 1980s word processing software and so on. We printed 100 copies. We spent some time walking around to local game stores in Boston area, Cambridge, places like that, and we sold a few and gave some to family members. It was funny. Somebody bugged me online like a few years ago and said, "Hey, do you have a copy of this?" And I was like, "Yeah," and I actually sold it to him. He's like, "Hey, I'll give you $50 for it." It's like, okay. So did not make much money, but that was sort of an early, in high school, I was spending more time making games than I was, doing schoolwork, things like that.
So what was your inspiration then to do a mogul game? Because still, that's pretty unique to be able to do the GM aspects of, and all that.
Yeah. So in 1993, I graduated from college. And my wife had gotten a job in about a month before I graduated. She was not my wife at the time. She was my girlfriend, but she had gotten a job in San Rafael, California for a company called Stormfront Studios.
Software.
And they were the creators of Tony La Russa Baseball. They were working on Tony La Russa Baseball 2 at the time. I actually had a government degree, and so I drove across country, and I moved in with her in an apartment she'd rented, and sort of started looking around for jobs that would fit my government degree, because I don't know, I was always incredibly good with math, good at designing games, sort of obsessed with it. Had done some of that when I was in college, on the computer and with friends. But I guess I was convinced that like I was bright and I was lucky enough to go to college, and therefore I sort of wanted to fix some of the problems in the world as opposed to just making games all my life. And I ended up getting, this is a long story nobody will really care about, but I ended up getting an interview with a company called the Plowshares Fund, which was sort of trying to reduce nuclear armaments around the world. And the owner of this organization was like this 80-year-old woman who'd been left some money by when she was a widow, and used that money to start this foundation. And I talked to her for like 3 hours, went into San Francisco, had this great thing, and she basically handed me the job. And then the next day she called back and said, yeah, I talked to the board and they decided, they want someone with more experience and policy, blah, blah, blah. So that just disappeared. I think within a couple of weeks, I was joining my wife for a baseball game at Oakland Coliseum. Obviously, La Russa was with the A's at the time, and so sort of a company outing to get people from Stormfront Studios out to watch a baseball game. Up on the screen was dot racing.
Yes.
That means, yeah, anyway. And I had my old IBM PC. I was sort of programming in BASIC at the time, but I learned a little bit of C, and I wasn't doing anything else at the time. So I got home and I wrote this little app that did dot racing, and there was some randomness and you could root for the different dots. I was just like, just a fun, as long as somebody's going to show that to me, I'm going to see if I can do it on the computer. And I showed that to some folks at Dee's work, and they were like, we're actually looking for a programmer for Tony La Russa Baseball, which, obviously was a great fit in a lot of ways. They were looking for people with programming degrees. I didn't have a programming degree, but I had spent I had worked part-time in the computing center at Wesleyan, where I was, and also had a summer job where I had learned C in order to sort of analyze all this data for the oceanography department. So I certainly knew a little bit there, and I sat down for the interview. And they were interviewing like grads from Stanford and Berkeley, computer science degrees. But at the end of the interview was the question that was like, okay, here's the thing. You're the shortstop and there are men on first and third and there's one out, and the ball's hit to you. What do you do? And I had to sort of think a little, and I guess I should have asked, like, is the infield in? But I think at the time I basically just said, well, if there's time to get the double play, then I get the double play. Otherwise, I'm going to throw home. And that got me the job, just because all these other folks who had better resumes than I did just didn't know baseball as well. And so they needed someone who knew baseball. So I ended up working on Tony La Russa 2 for DOS. I think they made it for the Sega Genesis.
I had that. In fact, I still have it.
Awesome. And then we worked on Tony La Russa 3, and actually they sort of gotten a deal with Microsoft. Microsoft was working on this brand new thing called Windows 95, and they wanted to have some games for it. And so I ended up becoming the lead programmer on Microsoft Baseball, which never really hit it was Tony La Russa, but for Windows. And so that was that was there. And in Tony La Russa 3, it was we put more work into making it an accurate sort of season-long simulation, and it used stats, and you could play 1963 and so on. And I basically went to my boss and said, hey, we should actually make it where you're the general manager and you can offer a trade to another team and it will evaluate the trade and give you the player back and so on. And he just didn't want to go in that direction. I think it was being published by Electronic Arts at the time. They wanted something shinier and flashier and, on the various consoles that were coming out. And so for a number of reasons, left the company and moved back east, got married in the fall of 1995. My wife got a job with a company called Grolier Interactive, who'd made a lot of money selling like encyclopedia CDs, and decided they were going to make games. And so she was in the games industry, but she was making enough money to support me while I was working on Baseball Mogul. And my idea was just, I know something about baseball games. I've been writing them since I was 8. I know a little bit about the industry now, just how developers and publishers work. And so I took, I built Baseball Mogul in, I think, about 10 to 12 months, sort of the very first version. And compared to what there is now, that was a very simplified game. Like you could see your current season of stats and you could see your previous season of stats, but you didn't sort of have baseball card style where you had like 12 or 15 lines of stats. And obviously it was missing a lot of stats. I think it might have just been using the current season stats. Anyway, there was no interactive play-by-play mode. You just traded a player and had your team set up and you said sim and it would just tell you whether you won or not. So that was the early version of Baseball Mogul. And knowing a little bit about the computer game industry, I called some people. I called a company called Mindscape, which I think was working on a game at the time called Ruth versus Aaron. And actually I went down and I met with them. And I showed them the demo, and I got to shake Hank Aaron's hand because he was there working on
nice.
That game. Boy, talk about the strongest grip you've ever. I mean, he was in 1996. I don't know how old he was, but boy, he was strong. So that was very cool. And I don't know, for people who are sort of interested in like how do tiny people like this one-person company get off the ground. I was lucky enough at the time that as I said, I knew something about development, so I could say like, hey, we're going to need $300,000 and we're going to hire 5 people and we're going to hire artists and that's how it's going to work. And if I hadn't worked at Stormfront, I wouldn't really have known how those things worked. And so I was able to make that proposal, and they said, well, we don't want to commit to publishing this yet, but we will give you $25,000 if you promise not to sell this game to anyone else for 2 months. And so I was like, sure, that's great. Go back, tweak it a little bit, work on it, and hopefully, obviously, if they're giving me some money, they must be interested. They're probably going to sign the whole thing. 2 months go by. They're like, yeah, we don't actually want to fund the larger game, so we're not going to publish it. And so I did that with Mindscape, and then I signed the exact same deal. Boy, my wife's here. Would she know? Was it with Electronic Arts, the second deal?
I don't remember.
I think it was with EA. I think EA gave me $25,000 to do the exact same thing, to not sell the game to anyone else, and then they ended up turning it down. But that basically
$50,000 later.
Yeah, so $50,000 later, we had enough money to manufacture CDs and buy ads in USA Today. What was it? Baseball Weekly, and I think in Computer Gaming World and other ads like that. Pre-internet, so we had an 800 number where people could buy. We had to get CDs manufactured, put in a box about this big to go on store shelves. Sold copies of the game. Micro Center ended up buying some games from us, so we had retail distribution in like 10 stores in the country. I don't know. I guess the rest is history at that point. But I remember Computer Gaming World. It was either that version or maybe the version after that gave us the Sports Game of the Year award. They really, they just really liked the innovation, the whole GM style, and gave us enough publicity that, I could keep doing that full time as a job. And I think fairly soon my wife had quit her job and she was helping me too with art and keeping the website up, and then the unfun stuff like taxes and payroll and all of that.
Now the Mogul games, the Football Mogul and Baseball Mogul games, these are games that where you start off and you pick a team or a franchise, and you're in charge of them. So walk us through what these games are like.
Okay, they were basically built as GM simulators, and obviously include, well, I shouldn't say obviously, if you haven't heard of them. I've put a lot of work over the last few years into getting stats that go back to 1950 and all the way through 2021. And so when we come out with a new version, so Football Mogul, the version that just came out September 3rd is called Football Mogul 22, and it has the stats. It has the rosters in it for the beginning of this season, the 2021 to 2022 season. If you want to know why it's called 22, even though we're still in 2021, the answer is that that's what Madden does. And if we didn't do that, people would think that our game was a year old.
Yeah, old, yeah.
And so we sort of had to just do what everyone else in the industry did. So you pick a team. You can pick the 86 Patriots and say, I'm gonna manage this team and see if I can do as well as they did. And then you just get an interface where you see the schedule of your team. You can see the standings. Obviously, everyone's 0-0. And then you have a lot of options. You could say, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to sim the whole season and see if I make the playoffs, right? And you could, in 30 seconds, it'll basically play all the games. And it'll say, hey, you were 10-6 and you're in the playoffs. And, you made the wild card. And then if you want, you can say, oh, I want to actually... so when everything sims, you get a little pop-up that says, do you want to play this game or do you want to simulate it? And so if you're controlling the Patriots, it will say, do you want to play the Patriots game? And you can say yes, and then it puts you into an interface where you've got you've got your personnel. The offensive personnel are on one side of the screen, the defensive personnel on the other, and then the bottom has some play choices. So you've got 30 different defensive plays, 60 different offensive plays. And then the ability that you can load in different playbooks. You can even edit those plays and so on. There's a pretty cool play designer there. And then you can track those plays. You can be like, all right, I've got this double slant play that I call all the time. And at the end of the season, you can go into the play editor and see, oh, wow, I called this 37 times on third down and I got the first down 23 times. And it'll tell you what percentage that is. You compare that to, I had a button hook play, or I had a fly or flag play, or another play that maybe was deeper and higher risk, and that didn't succeed as often. And it'll tell you the average yards you gained. So a lot of data there. So that's sort of on the playing side. Sort of I mean, there are other football games out there where you can interact and pick plays and call timeouts and see that interface. And so we've got that built in. And then the part that makes it somewhat unique is that there's a payroll, and you have to, at the end of the year, if a player's leaving, you can negotiate a contract to get them to stay, or you can let them go and then replace them with someone else from the free agent list. There's obviously there's the NFL draft every off season, I guess April now.
Does it generate players for you to pick?
I'm sorry?
Does it generate players for you to pick?
If you're playing like 1986, so in the 86-87 off season or the 87 NFL draft, it will look at the players who aren't in the database yet, but came into the league that year, and it will put them into the draft.
Oh, okay.
And so then you can look and pick.
So in theory, you could tank a team, get the first overall pick, and pick a guy that wasn't on that team, like a superstar, right?
Yes, very much so.
Your hockey is showing their Gardner.
Yeah, I know, but that would be kind of neat though. Is if you had a season you didn't play very well, and you come up for the draft, and you're like, oh look, Jerry Rice or whoever, Michael Irvin, a receiver is available, or a quarterback, or some name player that is coming into the league, and you can grab that player, and he wouldn't go on their normal team. He'd go on your team. That's cool. I like that.
Yeah. No,
how much variability though would be in that case to put, so there's no guarantee that Jerry Rice or Michael Irvin or Troy Aikman would be themselves, right?
Right. So the earlier versions of Football Mogul and Baseball Mogul were very much focused on what I sort of called a general manager simulator. And the thing is that if you're sitting in the front office of a professional football team, and a guy named Jerry Rice is on the board, you have no idea that he's a future Hall of Famer. And so what the game did is it added a good amount of randomness, so that Jerry Rice might have a lot of talent. He might sort of be ranked high on the board, and you might pick him. But then there was a good 80% chance that he wouldn't develop into a Hall of Fame player, because obviously there's a lot of luck there and so on. Maybe he becomes a moderate number 2 receiver, and someone else who's picked at the same time becomes a superstar, because you want to make the game challenging for the people that are playing it, so that they can't just sort of go, oh well, that's a familiar name and that's a familiar name, and then just pick guys that they know are going to make the Hall of Fame, even though the other teams, all run by computers, they don't go, oh, I know that guy's name, so they're sort of picking based on like these scouting reports. And they might, you'd sort of have an unfair advantage. So that was very much the way the game was built in earlier versions. And one of the things that I added a couple of years ago was sort of a checkbox called replay mode. And what that does is it loads a player's stats in at the beginning of every season and has the performances match those stats. So if you want something that's more closer to history, maybe you want to do one season or maybe a few seasons, but you really do want, Hall of Fame players to perform as Hall of Famers, you have that option. And I could actually call this up here, but anyway, there's a few other things you can tweak. There's, I think it's called like aging randomness. You can, obviously you can affect how often injuries occur. Injuries are a good example of, in the NFL, somebody will get hurt and they'll be out for a year. But even worse, they might get hurt, be out for a year, and not be the same player when they come back. So that's built into the sim. But if you don't want, Jerry Rice to have a career-ending injury when he's 24, you can tone down the level of injuries in the game.
Or see Bo Jackson play a full career, or Billy Sims, or something like that as well.
Yeah, that's fun too.
Now, do both baseball and football mogul, do they roll over? So if you're playing 86 and it ends, do you pick up with 87, or is the game over at that point?
No, you pick up at the next year. In fact, there's for baseball and for both games, there's a free version of the game where you can play a season, and then at the beginning of the next season, it says, "Hey, do you want to buy the full game now?" So one of the ways I get people interested in buying the game is you get your franchise, you play a season, you play 14 games, 16 games, you play in the playoffs, you you decide which players to re-sign, you draft some cool players, and then it says, hey, if you want to play the second season, you should get the full version. So that's obviously like the heart of the game. That's the part that I want people to pay for, is the multi-year building a dynasty, maybe, missing the playoffs and then improving your team. That's definitely the fun part of the game.
Salary cap, hard to program in? For obviously football, not baseball. We don't have that yet.
Yeah. I'm going to say it was relatively easy, partly because I just made some design decisions that made it easy. So you can't, when you sign someone to a 7-year, $140 million contract, it just says you're going to pay him $20 million a year for the next 7 years. In the real NFL, in the front office somewhere, there'd be some quant whose job was, all right, I got to sit down and we're going to pay him $7 million this year, and then we're going to pay him $28 million next year. Oh, and then we actually have some cap room, in 2024, so then we're going to pay him a lot.
But you basically do the AAV for a contract, yeah.
Yeah. So that's so I simplify it. The negotiation is pretty simple, right? So the player says, hey, I would like a 5-year deal for $20 million a year. And you say, how about I give you 7 years for $15 million a year, right? And they'll go back and forth there. But simplifying it in that way, not adding roster bonuses and other things like that, definitely made it simple. It has the average, so it has number of years, average salary, and then it has a signing bonus. And so obviously the signing bonus is a big part.
Right.
And yeah, if you give someone a 7-year contract that's $10 million a year with a $70 million signing bonus, then, as people who know football know, the salary is not guaranteed, but the signing bonus is. So yes. If you cut him the first season, you are on the hook for the $10 million per year of the signing bonus for 7 years, and that does get added to the salary cap. So yeah, it's definitely some trickiness there, but it's pretty straightforward. When you go to re-sign a player, it'll tell you what your current salary is, and then it will say, if you sign this guy, your current salary will be X. Like if you sign this guy at this deal, you will have $2 million of salary cap left over. And so it tries to make it simple so that you're the fun part is thinking about the talent and can I afford this guy? To me, the fun part isn't structuring a contract in a way that you get around, the bylaws.
Okay. Your game is unique in the sense that there's different levels of complexity as opposed to other management games where it's just go have fun. Walk us through it. What are you
talking the difficulty levels?
Difficulty levels.
Yeah. I know. I was going to ask you that too. So there's 4 or 5 difficulty levels, at least in the football. What gets easier and what gets harder if you choose different difficulty levels?
Yeah. I think it actually is labeled in the game as saying, so if you go to the options menu on the tools, the options dialog on the tools menu in Football Mogul, there's a little section that says artificial intelligence, and then it says difficulty level, and you can choose fan, coach, head coach, mogul. And then there's a checkbox that says autofill incomplete rosters, which is sort of a help if you're if you've built your team and it only has 3 wide receivers on it and you're in the off season, it'll just sort of grab scrubs and fill them in, because otherwise you can't, there are playbooks that use more than 3 wide receivers, and there are players that get injured, and so there's a minimum number, and so it will fill those things in. But to go back to your question about difficulty, it's very much about the artificial intelligence in the trade AI. And in the contract negotiation AI. So when you go into the game and you pick a play and you say, it's 3rd and 8, and I'm going to pick a draw play, and the defense is picking the computer is picking the defense for that. That's always the same. That's not affected by the difficulty. And it tries to be pretty smart, and it tries to realize, anyway, it says, well, 3rd and 8, it's probably going to be pass play, but every now and then we'll say, you know what? I bet this guy's going to call a draw, or I bet he's going to. And it just sort of, we'll guess a little, try and keep you on your toes. But it's definitely it's definitely an algorithm that doesn't change with the difficulty level. So the difficulty level that you choose when you start the game, or you can go back and change it in options, is about it's really just about sort of how stringent the opposing general managers are when you offer them a trade.
Okay.
And I think it's sort of fair to say that, like, on fan level, which is the lowest, that they're just pushovers, right? You can say, I'm going to trade you whatever. I'm going to trade you an 82 player for an 85 player. And in fan mode, it'll say, sure. And then in coach mode, it'll say, you know what? I really need an 82 player for an 82 player. And then in the next one, it actually gets a little more stringent and says, you have to give me a little bit more talent than I'm giving you back. And that may sound like, oh, wow, this is unfair. I'm going to get my butt kicked by the computer. But I think it's worth remembering that, like, you're the one in charge of the trades. You're the human with a really big brain, honestly. And you might say, oh, well, I tried to give an 82 for an 82, and he wouldn't give it to me. And so I went and I gave like 278s for an 82, and then it will give you the player. And if you mess around enough and you offer 10 different trades, you'll eventually find something where sort of you get more value out of the deal, even if the ratings don't really match. And so the higher difficulty levels are just to make that harder, so that it feels more like you're going up against a smarter opponent.
Okay. Now, this is obviously a game. You take one team and you try to run with that team. Is there any way that you can play other games in The Sims? So, for example, I'm playing the Patriots, and the Bills and the Dolphins are playing. And boy, if the Dolphins lose, the Patriots go in the division. I'd love to play the Bills versus the Dolphins. Is there a way that you can jump to another team and play that week?
Yeah. So there's a league editor that you can open up that I'm just looking at right here. And that has a lot of different options. You can change team names. You can move them to different divisions. You could even change the number of wins and losses they have if you just sort of wanted to force someone into the playoffs at the end of the season.
Now, is that in commissioner? Is that a commissioner mode thing?
Yeah. I mean, when you open league editor, it just says, hey, do you want to be in commissioner mode? And then you say yes.
And that's when you can trade anybody at any time too, right? Commissioner mode? Okay.
So if you're in commissioner mode and you go to the trade screen, you just basically, you put one player on your team on the, you put players from your team onto the trading block, and then you put players from the other team on. And then instead of saying offer trade, if you're in commissioner mode, the button actually changes. So it says force trade. And so you're forcing whatever trade is on the block. So, that's an easy way to move players around if you want to do that and not have to deal with artificial intelligence there. And then part of the league editor is it'll tell you whether a team is controlled by the computer or controlled by the human. And the default mode is you start and you pick a season and you control one team. And that was sort of the big game design vision, right? Is you control one team, and can you compete against the other 31 and win? But as the game expanded, I said, hey, I want to make it so that you can control 4 teams, 8 teams. And so you can do that. You can go in and say that I control those teams. And so if 5 of the teams are human controlled, then when you simulate and those pop up, you'll have the option of playing those play by play. Is the mode where you
I see. Okay.
Play by play mode and play those. So yeah.
So you can actually control.
Just a little tricky.
You can control more than one team, or would that just be for that week?
Yeah, you control. So you could control 5 teams. You could control 32 teams. And then I've even put in some hotkeys so that if the Patriots and the Dolphins are playing and they're both human controlled, then you're controlling both of them.
Oh, wow.
And if you want, you can invite your friend in to sit at the keyboard. And I think the letters are used for the offensive plays and the numbers are used for the defensive plays. And so you could sort of just pick a play, and if they can't see the keyboard, then they would pick a play and then it would play out.
80s style.
Yeah.
So you would start the season. You have to obviously select one team to start with, and then you could go into the league editor and say, look, I'd like to play these other teams as well.
Yeah. So the default mode, without making it too complicated, is you control one team. But yeah, the league editor lets you do more than that.
Oh, fantastic. Let's see. One other question I have is there a way I can see the full schedule for the upcoming weeks? I know you can go and see all the games that you played, but when that week coming up, it seems like you can only see your team's schedule. Is there a way to see the upcoming games?
There is not right now. So there's a calendar screen where you can see all of your, so it'll say, Patriots at the top and show weeks 1 through week 18. But yeah, if you want to see who else is playing in week 1, you have to click on the Patriots name, click on Cleveland Browns, and then it'll show the Browns schedule. The games page does show you all of the games after they've been played, so you can see all the scores. But there isn't an easy way to just see all of the games coming up. You aren't the only person to suggest that. That's on my list of things I want to, figure out how to do. I mean, it's relatively straightforward, but just have to take the time to make that possible.
Yeah, it's always nice to see like the upcoming games of this week and say, okay, which one do I want to play, or who am I playing, or who my opponent's playing, and see that as well.
Yeah.
So, anyway, let me see. Anything else on Mogul, Ron?
Let's talk about Baseball Mogul for a minute. We spent a lot of time on the Football Mogul. Obviously, stats go back further than 1950. You could set the last version I played. You could set prices for ice cream on hot days and make some extra money. And pitch by pitch mode. Walk us through some of the features for that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so everything I described about Football Mogul, you can do in baseball. And in many ways, you can do a lot more. So the stats go back to 1901. As you mentioned, there's a play-by-play mode. So when you play in play-by-play mode in Football Mogul, you pick a play, they pick a play, and then there's some text that appears on the screen that says, Bledsoe takes the snap, drops back in the pocket, Fryer is open, Bledsoe passes, deflected by so-and-so, incomplete. So there's sort of some text description there. Baseball has essentially changed that. So there's a little bit of rudimentary animation. It's not going to look like MLB The Show, but it has an animated pitcher, animated batter. So the pitch comes in, you can see where the pitch crossed the plate. You can see if it was a strike or a ball. There's a little section on the side that shows, pitch 1, curveball, 82 miles an hour, and then there'll be sort of a little number on the diagram, so you know that hit the corner and was a called strike. So you have a lot of data there about
very much like watching a game on the web page for if you're following Game Center. I think it is for MLB. Yeah, very much like that.
Yep. Yeah, it is very much like that. And I think there was a Fangraphs review that said Baseball Mogul is I don't remember the exact quote, most realistic plate appearance simulator, that exists or something. Like, we certainly put a lot of focus on that, and did a lot of work to make it realistic. Some of the realism gets a little bit of pushback from players, because I did a lot of research into like how often does a major league pitcher literally hit the strike zone with a curveball, and the answer is there's a lot of pitchers who maybe get it over 50-60% of the time. Even if they're aiming for just the middle of the strike zone, they will still miss. And so people will write back and say, hey, I aimed for the middle of the strike zone on a 3-0 count and I missed. That's crazy. And then I have sort of a standard, well, it's not that crazy, because here's some data that I have. But the good news on that too is you can actually go into the settings and make you can make the pitchers a little bit more accurate in that part of the game. So if you want to play something where you have some more control there, you can do that.
All right. You also are working on a cart and dice baseball game.
Yes. There's a game called Season Ticket Baseball. I was actually this morning just in the process of setting up seasonticketbaseball.com. So I have that domain, and it might be live by the time people are listening to the podcast. But if not, there is a Season Ticket Baseball Facebook group. It shouldn't be that hard to find if you search for it. The Facebook group is a place where I put up a lot of downloadable files for the cards. I'm not sure. I forget I think 1975, Anyway, had a number of seasons up there that people could download for free. The rules, of course, are free. So you can still sort of play in the beta test. And I'm in the process because people keep saying, hey, this game is ready. You should start selling it. So I have been selling, I don't know if people are looking here, printing copies of the rules. I don't have the cards in front of me. Anyway, so you can go to sportsmogul.com and go to the store, and you will see a copy of the rules, 2 World Series teams, and I have like 5 choices for the World Series. 2 World Series teams, sort of a quick start card, because what people have really liked about this game, and what I definitely, my focus was just to make a game that was easy to play, that was fun, that didn't have charts, so put a lot of work into how do you get 98% of the results resolved on the batter cards or pitcher card, or there aren't fielding tables. I've actually sort of taken the fielding results and put them in the corner of each batter card for that player's primary position. So it really just makes it so if you've played card and dice games before, you almost don't have to read the rules. You just pull out the cards, you roll the dice, and you're like, oh, 538. I wonder where is 538? Oh, look, it's on the shortstop card. And then you see the result, and you can move on from there. So just a lot of work into making something intuitive. I think I may have mentioned that Facebook group has been up for 3 years, I think. And the last 2 people have had access to the game and have played it, downloaded it, printed, given feedback, things they liked about it. So I really think I'm onto something in terms of, it has the realism of a strat or an app or something, but also just has the speed and just ease of play and sort of fun factor of some of the simpler games that are out there, like a history maker or something else. I mean, there's some very cool, innovative games from small companies out there.
Yes.
So definitely entering that realm. And I just sent an article into St. Patrick, who you guys had on the show before.
Yes.
So hopefully there will be a reasonably long article in Sports Sim magazine soon. If he thinks what I wrote is interesting, but I talk about some of the design decisions I made. I talk about this whole sort of almost sort of a second game that I designed where the math didn't really work and the numbers were confusing. And so I went down that path and I said, that's not good. And I went back to the drawing board and came up with this sort of 3 dice, baseball card, batter card, defense card type of thing. So for people who play games or who like home brewing their own rules for games, I think people will enjoy that article a lot in terms of just
nice.
Seeing that other people think about things the same way, other people make mistakes, some clever things I came up with. So interesting.
Nice. I just want to go back to Football Mogul for 1 second here. Question here. In Baseball Mogul, you got a little bit of animation going on when you're playing Baseball Mogul. Has there been any thought to adding some kind of animation to the Football Mogul game or chalkboard or something?
Yeah, I mean, it would probably sort of be like circles and squares moving around. There's some request for that, but I think people. Anyway, there's been some thought, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. If I build that sort of graphical, if I built some more level of animation into Football Mogul, it would probably be an excuse to build a game from square one, so that I could use a game platform, maybe a platform like Unity. But the advantage of a sort of a multi-platform tool is, if I was going to sort of redo the game in that way, I could then build a game that would work on Macs, would probably, maybe work on Chromebooks, maybe work on iPhones, maybe not work on Chromebooks unless we make a web interface. Anyway, it's certainly something that I've thought about, but if I was going to put that level of effort into getting that right, it would be an excuse to make something that the Mac players could finally have a game that could finally have Football Mogul. So that's not immediately around the corner, but definitely suggestions of, hey, can we just have a little, guys moving around a little would be more fun for me than sort of a written.
It's fun to have something to look at, even any kind of animation at all, just something, you know what I mean? So anyway, Ron, anything else?
I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, that was great. Awesome. So we'll wrap things up here. So again, this has been Clay Dreslough. He's the owner of Sports Mogul Inc. and the designer and programmer for Baseball Mogul and Football Mogul, and also the season ticket baseball. I need to check out that season ticket baseball game. I do.
Awesome.
I need to check
Dave,
that out.
I do have one thing I'd like to mention. Just before this podcast, I went to the website and I set up a coupon for the word digital. Obviously, people should know how to spell the word digital if they know how to find your podcast. And if they enter that at sportsmogul.com in the store, it'll give them 40% off anything that's downloadable. So that would be Baseball Mogul or Football Mogul.
Sports Mogul. Okay.
We do, the game. I still have the option. You can buy a USB, you can buy this if you want, a little USB that has Baseball Mogul and Football Mogul on it. If you don't have a good internet connection, or if you sort of just don't like that method of installing games. So the coupon won't work on physical products, but it will work on the downloads.
How about a 5 1/4?
Yeah, we don't have that on 5 1/4 anymore.
I don't think even LaRussa was released on that, or at least not 2.
No, I think LaRussa might have been on 3 1/2s.
Yes, that would have been 3 1/2.
Yeah, I mean, so the first Baseball Mogul, I had to go out and spend $800 on a CD burner. So we were selling CDs at that point.
Yeah.
Before DVDs, of course, so it had to be less than 700 megs. But yeah, I've never produced a game for sale that was on floppies.
Oh.
Wow.
I'm not that old.
I remember some of my favorite hockey games were for the DOS, and they were on those old floppies. Yeah, Commodore 64 is what I played. In fact, I had I think I had a Mindscape hockey game too on the Commodore 64. So Mindscape, was a company I'm familiar with. Before we go, a quick LaRussa story on the Sega Genesis. I remember playing that. And you had to go to the bullpen to warm somebody up. And so I'd get a guy up in a bullpen, and I'd go back to the game, and I would forget about him. And you go to the bullpen, and he's tired because he wouldn't stop throwing.
Yep.
So you had to keep an eye on it. So and if you were bringing him in the game, you had to sit him down. And if you just brought him in, he was cold. So managing the bullpen and getting the guys up and down was like a mini game in the game. That was kind of fun to do. But that was one of my funnest baseball games on the Sega Genesis. So anyway, all right. So Clay, where can we get a hold of your games?
So as I mentioned, sportsmogul.com. That's the word sports, MOGUL. .com is the website for Sports Mogul Inc. And there's a store there that has download links for the current Baseball Mogul, Football Mogul. I currently have it set up so that there's the free single season version of the baseball game. I think the football game is there too, or you can actually get the football game from 4 years ago is free. So if you don't feel like spending some money, you can certainly see what the games are like, and then if you say, "Ooh, I really want the 2021 Ravens" or whatever it is you're into, you can come back and use that coupon. Retail price for those games is $40, so 40% off gets you down to $23.95. And includes all the seasons. So obviously I think it's a great value there. And I think the store has the sort of starter kit of season ticket baseball. And as the next few months go on, I will make some more teams available.
Awesome. Fantastic. All right. Hey, Clay, thanks for joining us on the Digital to Dice podcast.
All right. Thank you. It was fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, by the numbers, episode 107, a fantastic interview with Clay Dreslough of Sports Mogul. And again, if you missed that, head over to sportsmogul.com, put in the code DIGITAL, and you'll get 40% off your digital order. So I might head over there and pick up Baseball Mogul myself. I got to get the new one.
I think you'd like that.
I think I would too. I had the old one. I enjoyed it. Now that I'm into these games, and that was a true story. Football Mogul was my first foray into these sports sims, and I tell that story all the time. So that was the first one. So it was interesting there that he was the guy that I probably talked to.
Yeah, I think he was the guy. Yeah. There's another. If you ever followed a baseball game, and I know I'm talking to the wall here, on the MLB website, that looks like Clay's game. You see pitch by pitch and location, so there's a lot of interaction with that one as well.
Yeah.
So I know we didn't talk about that one too much. So
that was kind of good. Yeah. Hey, again, ways to get a hold of us. digitaltodice.com is the website. 978-751 is the dice line. 978-751-DICE is the dice line. Oh, I almost messed that up. digitaltodice@yahoo.com is the email. And over on Facebook, facebook.com/groups/digitaltodice. And again, thanks for Clay Dreslough for joining us here on the show. Ron, thanks for joining me again.
As always.
You're still here, huh? Are you part-time now, or what's going on with you?
Yeah.
Hey, if Aunt Becky can get another job, so can you.
That's it. I'm part-time. After 107 of these, I'm still just part-time.
Say goodbye, Ron.
Goodbye, Ron.